going to devote our energies to sports and gardening, all the cultural pursuits as far as they're concerned. In fact, we're going to put the goons to sleep. Meanwhile, we dig.
Here we go again.
Greetings and welcome to the Anadrome. This is Burn Power coming to you from Tbilisi, Georgia on a fine, fairly mild winter day. And I have a few thoughts on my mind, including I've been reflecting on the year 2024 and what kind of a year it has been for horror films. And I'm asking myself the question, is this the best year there's ever been for horror films? It's an interesting thought, and let me make my case for why it very well could be. For one thing, if you start watching people's best of list, the 10 best of the year, and there are quite a few of them around the internet, you will find many people saying, oh, I couldn't just make 10. This was such a year, I wanted 20, I wanted 25. A rather fascinating development. Also, I think that we live in really confused times. And that turns out to be really good for horror films. Not always. For instance, during the middle of World War II, there weren't that many horror films. But in the year 2024, oh yeah, we were talking to ourselves with horror films. So we are going to dive into the question of whether this was the best year. I will have a best of a little bit later after I've seen a couple of films like Nosferatu, Heretic, and Terrifier 3, and Red Rooms. Those four strike me as very important. So I'm going to try to see those first, or at least Nosferatu, because I have the feeling from what everyone's saying, Nosferatu is going to be quite high on my list, and could even end up in the number one slot. So I'm going to wait till after, actually, the year is over. Gosh, what a radical thought. It's funny, I've seen people doing all these, the people who died in the year 2024, the musicians or people in film, and they were made like 2-3 weeks ago. And I'm going like, hey, guys, there's a whole, 3 weeks to a month to go here, and you have, what are you doing? Why is everyone jumping the gun? And here's the funny thing. They won't go back the next year and pick up December when they do the next one. It's just a really radical thing. I remember first being disturbed by this when Rolling Stone magazine in November of beginning of December of, I think it was 1980 or it might have been 1979, did this whole the best music of the year, the most important events and everything, and then a few days after it came out, I think 11 people were crushed to death during a Who concert. And I thought, why do people do this? Well, I know why they do it with film. It's because basically we know there's no other films coming out after a certain point. Nevertheless, does everyone catch up with those films? That's what I'm doing. It doesn't make any sense to me to talk about who passed away this year before the end of the year. It's just a strange thing. Okay, rant over. And since the rant is over, let me just remind you of a couple things. One, yes, you can subscribe to the channel. I need you. 2, you can hit like and get the notification bell and leave a comment. Help me out. Help the algorithm out. The blind idiot god. 3, you could subscribe to the channel, and you could also just go ahead and use the PayPal link down below, or even the GoFundMe link, which is active if you want to be generous and or need a tax-deductible receipt. But let me just remind you of this. It's here, rescued from Alaska. This year, my first ever book, 3 Motions. Motions is an old English word for puppet shows. Indeed, there are 3 puppet plays here written by myself for my Alaskan puppetry classes, including my versions of the medieval classic Everyman, cleverly entitled Every Puppet, and even better, my retelling of the Faust legend, updated for the 21st century, also very cleverly, with a special introductory essay on the meaning of puppetry. Now, are these 50-page booklets physically worth the $25 price? No. But this isn't about material possessions. This is about being part of this odd channel and whatever it is we're doing here, trying to understand things. And these little booklets are unique. Each one is numbered and signed by yours truly. When they sell out, they are gone. I will never reprint them. Special deals if you want multiple copies for a production of your own. Just let me know you're doing it. That's $25 for the USA, Canada, Mexico, most of Europe. There may be some corners, like, I don't know, Russia, etc., and might require some extra money, as would Asia, Latin America, and Africa, or Tonga, or Australia probably. I'll have to add another $5 or so, depending on where you're from. But part of the money goes to my assistants who are shipping these from me from their respective American and European locations. Use the links below, PayPal, GoFundMe, and make sure you add the word book, B-O-O-K, book, to let me know this is not just a normal contribution to the channel, which you can still make. This book will not last long. Help me keep the channel alive. I get no other funding except from you, the viewer. I don't get it from YouTube. I don't get sponsorships. It's up to you. If you appreciate what I do on this channel, get a book. It's a great way to remember what this channel was about, and it'll be something unique because they're all signed and numbered. Now that you've got your book reminder, and you should buy one because you need it and I need you to buy one. And there are, I think, about 80, no, there were 80 to begin with. There are now 60 left. They will not last, and when they're gone, they're gone. Okay, done with that. Now, the year 2024 had incredibly interesting horror films, and they just kept coming out. So, the last one major horror film to come out was Nosferatu, Christmas Day in most places. It won't come here until the 2nd of January. But I'm sitting there saying to myself, they keep topping each other. I thought the first month or so of the year was okay. Then we got films like Immaculate, which I thought was pretty good. And then The First Omen, which I thought was also, interestingly, are both similar topics and themes. And then came Abigail. I think that was April or so. And I thought, like, wow, that's a really interesting film. And it's interesting not because it's deep, but because of the imagery in it. And it was an actual, some people have classified it as action horror. I don't know why. It's got vampires. So what if it's got guns? It's like, so what if there's a lot of movement by the vampire? It's a vampire film. Fess up. So, and then as time went on, we started getting things like Longlegs. And that was superseded by The Substance. And then there were films like The Heretic, which from the people I trust, it seems like a film I've got to see. And then Nosferatu, likewise. The people I trust giving reviews from different quarters have all said, wow, Nosferatu. And I watched the original Nosferatu from 1922 and the 1979 Werner Herzog version a couple weeks ago, hoping I would get to see it before I went away on my trip to Florence coming soon. on the 2nd actually of the month of January. But anyway, let's get into it. One of the things I like doing is looking at the themes that come out. So you take something like Long Legs, and it's very female-centric in two interesting ways. One, the protagonist is a woman, but two, what is going on with the Nicolas Cage character? If you know, you know. And I would argue, given that the film was shot by Oz Perkins, that's really kind of a big question mark hanging over trans identities, because Nicolas Cage is essentially becoming a doll. And dolls feature heavily in this. You could say dolls and puppets are a major motif in the last couple of years. I mean, you've got Megan, came out last year. Stop Motion is another fascinating film this year, featuring some very sinister stop-motion animation dolls. Then there was Oddity, which features a mannequin quite heavily. Is anyone noticing this but me? Is it just because I'm geared towards puppets and figures and dolls and all this stuff that I see all this stuff? Is anyone else noticing this? It's something to think about, because I think it all relates to our fears of self and the rise of AI. In other words, where is the dividing line between the thing, the object, and the person? And I think this is not simply something for the moment, or something that's going to become much more important further down the line. The substance. Yeah. But many of these things overlap. So there's also serial killers in Long Legs. And serial killers feature in Strange Darlings. Serial killers feature in Maxine. So last year there was like When Evil Lurks, which was I only saw that film this year, and I was like, oh, wow, that's important. And that's about a corrupt childhood film. Abigail's a corrupt childhood film. The fear of children figures extraordinarily heavily in The First Omen and Immaculate with Sydney Sweeney. The last moment of Immaculate is probably one of, I think, the defining moments of this fear of natalism that we see. And I'm not saying Sydney Sweeney is afraid of children. I don't have any idea. But the point is, I think we see this fear. So many people have chosen not to give birth. And we see these films coming out about the suspicions of birth, also the suspicions of childhood. And I've seen this comment more and more, how children are inherently creepy. What does that mean? I think that's a huge red flag over our culture, if that's how we see children. And I think it's essentially larger adult children saying, I can't take the competition, and who are these little ones? Do they realize they were once these things themselves? The Substance, another female-centric film. In fact, if we go through it, Long Legs, The Substance, Late Night with the Devil. Now, it features a lot of stuff about possession and the devil and stuff, but the central person who's in trouble in the film, another woman. And then we have stop motion. A lot of it's happening in the mind. This curse passed on from mother to daughter. Oddity, female-centric. Abigail, female-centric. Strange Darling, female-centric. A Quiet Place, female-centric. Immaculate, female-centric. Cuckoo, probably female-centric. Let's see. Alien Romulus, female action hero at the center. Maxine, name says it all, female-centric. And so you look at a lot of the most important films of this year, and you see this thing happening. There's also this weird borderline between the woman and the non-woman, shall we say, or the woman or the person who wants to be a woman. And I'm just going to let that hang out there and not go too far into it. Late Night with the Devil, demons, demon possession, big themes this year. Now, what's funny is I see a lot of people saying, like, there were a lot of religious horror films. And whenever I hear, it's always like younger folks who talk about religious horror. And I think the reason they talk about it is because they don't know anything about religion. quite frankly, because most of these films are Catholic horror films, and it's not any specific religion. It's usually Catholicism or something influenced by it. If you see someone coming in doing exorcisms, that is generally a Catholic-oriented film, even if they're not explicitly Catholic. Late Night with the Devil. Another theme here is the media. So The Substance, Late Night with the Devil. Let's see, what else? Maxine had themes of the media, of being seen, of films and television and all of these things. Not exactly an accident. The First Omen has possession ideas. The Immaculate has definitely got some of these ideas roaming around there. Also, both of those are what we would call back in the day nunsploitation films. Lots of Christian imagery floating around. Interestingly enough, when people talk about religious horror, it's like they're afraid of saying the C word, Christian. It's like, don't say Christian, just say religious. Religion is vague. Christian is specific. And in fact, most of these films that have, even Heretic, which is about Mormon missionaries coming to a very evil Hugh Grant, well, yeah, it's religious. But, what kind of religion is Mormonism? I'll give you a hint, it's on the Christian side. Strange Darling, female-centric. We got serial killers and also a relationship from hell in this movie. Another thing is with the Alien film and the new Quiet Place Day One, you've got this idea of an alien attack, but also possession. In Alien, it's very specific. The facehugger puts its little beak down inside of you and you become impregnated. Oh, more horror of children. So these are some of the kinds of themes we are seeing this year. And I think these films are fascinating. Now, let me just a list of some of my favorites. Immaculate. We've talked about these. Sydney Sweeney's pet project, which is really interesting. What kind of person is Sydney Sweeney going to end up being? We don't know yet. That's what's really fascinating. Quiet Place Day One. A lot of people were surprised by this film because they were expecting more along the Quiet Place, like number 2. And I think The Quiet Place number 2 was a bit of a step down. It wasn't a bad film. A lot of people love it more than the first one. But I thought it was just a slight step down from Quiet Place number 1, which is really a top-tier film. Abigail. Vampires. Vampires have been making a return ever since the voyage of the Demeter, the last voyage of the Demeter that came out last year. Now we got Abigail, and then vampires are back with Nosferatu. Interestingly enough, none of these vampires are these suave, romantic vampires. There's no Twilight. Twilight left a bad taste in everyone's mouth. And I think we've scrubbed the suave, debonair, romantic image of the vampire away from our system for a while. So what we've got is the brutal, watching Nosferatu again, the 1922 one, I just said, he's like Lord of the Rats. That same feature shows up in the Kinski version, where he is also the German version of a rat. But it's these, there have been other movies like this. 30 Days of Night is the dark vampire, the animalistic vampire. So was Night Flyer, the Stephen King movie. I wish. They had no cover on that except the words Night Flyer on a plane or something, instead of showing you the monster. Because when you see the vampire in this film, it's definitely out of the Nosferatu school of vampirism, which I think is a very interesting school. And it's the kind of school that Stephen King really likes. The First Omen surprised everyone. And I think that a lot of people weren't, another Omen sequel. Who needed that? Evidently we did. And it's not a sequel, it's a prequel. But then you had Oddity, which was an odd film which came out of nowhere. And again, female-centric, this weird, I'll use the word creepy, even though I don't like applying it all over the place, but it works here because it's really kind of disturbing, this mannequin that's here. Then we had Cuckoo. Was this a film about werebirds? Watch the film and tell me, because it's one of the weirdest films I've seen. Alien Romulus, certainly better than some. This film caused a lot of controversy, mostly because people get way too invested in fandoms. But I thought it was solid. It wasn't in the top tier, but it was below it. Maybe equal to the third one or whatever. Alien, though. And Maxine, not quite the sequel we were looking for from the X trilogy by Ty West, but nevertheless, worth watching nonetheless. And then we had two important horror comedies this year. One, Lisa Frankenstein, which a lot of people didn't see. But if you're looking for kind of a lightweight horror film, try that one. And Beetlejuice. Horror imagery, Tim Burton style, which is never that dark, really. But, it's a good film for people who want to laugh while watching some dark imagery. Neither of those I file in my horror section. They're both very firmly comedies. Stop motion. This is perhaps one of the creepiest films of the year. And it's slow, and it is very, very disturbing. And, what happens when you have slimy stop-motion animation creatures, slimy, decayed stop-motion animation creatures that crawl into your head? I don't know. That's the answer to the question. Very fascinating. Late Night with the Devil. This is a film, many of these films can all take turns, like Strange Darling. I've seen this on top, and people's... all of these films have been in someone's top 10. Late Night with the Devil, fascinating found footage film, but using a television studio and a talk show concept. Absolutely fascinating. The Substance, for many people, this was the horror film of the year, except for those who had Nosferatu at the top. And then Longlegs, which I think is absolutely unique, interesting film. But we'll talk about all these more when I do my top 10. But we'll consider this the beginning of the conversation. Oh, and I forgot. I did not get a chance to see Terrifier 3. I watched Terrifier 1 and 2, all the Terrifier movies, getting ready for it, but then it never came here to Georgia, because I don't know if anybody would get the weird clown idea here. It's just, we in the West tend to think that clowns are universally symbols of horror, but they're not. And we've made them so, but that's another issue. We'll discuss that more a little bit later. In a Violent Nature was evidently a film. I have not seen this one, and I haven't seen Terrifier 3. I haven't seen Red Rooms, which has to do with a serial killer and some woman's obsession with him, but people say it's easily one of the best films of the year. Mads, a French film, which people say is absolutely fascinating. I haven't seen it yet. See, I either have to see it in the theater or get a physical copy. So I wait, and when I hear enough people say it, I might break down and get a physical copy. But the one thing you're not going to catch me doing is just simply streaming things. I've decided, except when I really have to. I think last time I used Netflix was over a year ago. When I really have to, I will just simply go on Netflix for a month or something like that. Join Amazon Prime, join up for a bit, and then delete it before I have to pay anything. Because I am just done with streaming and what it has done to us. It has really had bad effects. It's had bad effects on theatrical distribution. It's had bad effects on people's over-familiarity and using up way too much of people's time. I just think it's a devil's bargain. Yeah, you get it whenever you want. And so what? Plus, the prices keep going up and up. So now people, if you have a full complement of different streaming services, you don't have to worry about getting cable. You already are paying that much a month for it. So that's my little rant on that. And there's another film I've heard some stuff about, but I haven't seen it pop up anywhere. It's called Azrael. And those are some films that I am very interested in. In a Violent Nature is a serial killer film, but The whole thing's done from the perspective of the kind of Jason Michael Myers figure. It sounds interesting. So here's the question. Is 2024 the greatest year in the history of movies? And I've been thinking about it, and it certainly is up there. And maybe it is. Only time, a bit of time will tell. But I think a lot of things happened this year. I think this year, one thing we saw in the box office was there was a split in the successful films between the cute films and the horrific films, the horror films. So in cute films, I think you had In and Out 2, you had The Wild Robot, which people say is pretty good. You had, some other Minions-related film, Despicable Me Part 62 or something. And then you had Deadpool and Wolverine. But Deadpool and Wolverine, if I was to show that to a person from, say, 1970, they would say, that's a horror film, but it's a comedy. And there are scenes in there of as much viscera as you could possibly imagine in a film. So I would put it more on the horror and comedy side of the fence. So you have these cute films. Wicked would be in the cute category. Hint about Wicked. Oh, I just saw it. I hated it. I absolutely hated it. It's well produced, but I hated the message of it. It just struck me as being... I'm not going to go into it. Maybe if you push me, I'll go into it sometime. So let's think about... I just made my case for why 2024 is so important. And I think we're going to see more body horror, more figures, things with, the clown, Art the Clown in Terrifier, clowns, dolls, puppets, all showed up very, very seriously this year. And that's no accident. I think we will see more of these images. And I often thought that because of the pandemic, we're going to see more masked films as horror. And we have. The Black Phone, but some of these films as well have that mask quality. So we're seeing films that I think in the future we will look back on and say, wow, that was an important film. I'm a little bit ahead of the curve because I study the history of horror all the time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you a question. What would be your vote for the best year for horror films? Now, don't just blurt out. Also, why do people start writing comments before a video is over? That just drives me insane. It's like, listen to the full argument before you make a comment. Sorry. Okay, rant over. So I see this all the time. I see someone starting to write something and going, and they'll write, at 16 minutes you said this, and then a few minutes later they go, well, wait, I saw that you said this, but at minute 20:22, and I'm sitting there going, can't you just finish? Keep a few thoughts in your head, please? Okay. Maybe it's that I come from a time before endless distractions. Although we had distractions when I was young, they were called television and records, but, by contrast with today, they're nothing. Okay, here are some other years for your consideration. I'm just going to mention these and some of the films that came out these years. So are you ready? I was originally thinking 1931 because of Frankenstein and Dracula. But then I started thinking, no. 1932. 1932 has The Mummy by Karl Freund, Freaks by Todd Browning, who also directed Dracula, if you remember, Vampire by Carl Theodor Dreyer from Denmark. That is an amazing film. If Robert Eggers ever decides to remake another old weird film, Vampire should be top on his list because he could do it so well. Island of Lost Souls, White Zombie, and The Old Dark House, which is such a dark comedy set in an old dark house, directed by James Whale, who did Frankenstein and quite a few other important films. That's year one, 1932. Now, the next one, actually, the more I started thinking about it, the more I started saying, maybe it's 1960. For me, if it isn't 2024, it's 1960. Why? Well, you've got Psycho. And a lot of you are probably going, well, what else came out in 1960? Peeping Tom, which is along the same exact theme, serial killers, but makes Psycho look like a picnic. Then my favorite film, Les Yeux Sans Visage, The Eyes Without a Face, by Georges Franju, which is pretty much my number 2 or 3 film of all time. Came out that year. You also had City of the Dead, sometimes called Horror Hotel. People are now calling this a folk horror film, to which I'm saying, no, this is a witch film. And it's a really dark, black witch film. And people die in this film you don't expect to. And the mood is it's dripping with dark, ethereal mood. Let's see, what else came out? The House of Usher, the first of Roger Corman's Edgar Allan Poe movies. Black Sunday by Mario Bava. The Village of the Damned, The Last Woman on Earth, directed by Roger Corman. The Circus of Horrors. 13 Ghosts, the kind of really cheesy, campy original film by William Castle. Jigoku, a Japanese film, which is, the kind of legendary classic Japanese horror film. The Hands of Orlok. Little Shop of Horrors, Atom Age Vampire, more trashy stuff. Tormented, a Burt I. Gordon film, which obviously he saw Psycho and said, "Oh, I can rush this out before the end of the year." Psycho, Tormented, Repulsion, they're all that kind of film, except Repulsion, of course, is classic. Blood and Roses, a very influential vampire film by Roger Vadim, who was basically, I think he was Brigitte Bardot's paramour at the time. And then Brides of Dracula from Hammer. And I just saw this other one called The Mill of the Stone Women. It's an Italian film. What a year. So that gets my vote. And plus it was a year that changed horror completely. Next, let's go to 1978. Now, I thought about 1979 as well, which has things like Friday the 13th and Alien. Of course, Alien was a bigger hit than most everything here. And you could be saying, well, Byrne, what about the year The Exorcist came out or the Texas Chainsaw Massacre? And my criterion is not if there's one big hit. Well, that's obviously important, but there's got to be a whole phalanx of other hits to go with it. So if someone looks back and says, well, 2024 was the year The Substance came out, I'd go like, well, why don't you look again? There's quite a few other really important films. And in fact, I would be saying, if you haven't seen, go through and watch some people's top 10 lists of horror in 2024. And if there's any films you haven't seen, you should see them. Because people are not putting these films down for no reason. There are a couple of lists I saw that made me laugh. Someone actually had, Winnie the Pooh, number 2, Blood and Thunder. I'm just like going, okay. This person had the weirdest list of all. But 1978, get this. The original Halloween. Okay. That's crucial right there. Dawn of the Dead by George Romero. The Fury, Brian De Palma's sadly forgotten follow-up to Carrie, which is, in many ways, it's not quite as good as Carrie, but it's an absolutely fascinating film, and you should check that out. Invasion of the Body Snatchers, by the Philip Kaufman version, which many people consider superior to the 1950s version. I don't, but many people do, and I can see why. It's a great film. Martin, George Romero's vampire film, or is it? Piranha by Joe Dante, and the infamous I Spit on Your Grave, the original one. All of those came out in 1978, and there were, of course, many more. And the last year, I'm going to say, this is probably the year that'll pop up for most people who are younger, 1999. 1999, just to give you 3 films from that year. Blair Witch Project, which literally opened the whole door on found footage films. The Sixth Sense, absolute classic. And then you have Audition from Japan. Those 3 alone, if you got 3 films of that quality in 1 year, do it. But anyway, maybe I'm wrong. Some people say 2007. I think there's cases to be made for other years. Why don't you tell me your favorite year for horror films? What do you think is not favorite year? Let's not do that. Important year. Year when horror really took a step in new directions. So these are my votes. And that's all I'm going to say right now. Thanks for watching. Thanks for spending a little bit of time with me. Thanks for letting me rant about people who type things before they are finished. See, if you're typing something before it's finished, especially if you're still listening to it, it means you're not listening to it. That's what that means. That's why I get so peeved. It's like if someone is telling you a story and they're saying, okay, so I went down the street and then there was this car accident and we came up to it and said, oh, wow, car accident. Yeah, I've had that. That person isn't listening. And that's what certain comments are like. So be a good commenter. All right. So thank you for spending time with me. And from Georgia, where we say drobi, which means temporarily. We'll just be gone from each other a little while, and then we will meet again. And I hope your 2022 is meaningful, and I hope that the horror continues, because I think we need it. But we'll see. Maybe, I think right now, just to get outside of horror for a second, but this is the reason why horror is so important, is we are seeing something big changing in the world. We are, I would say, officially out of the zone from the post-World War II era, and I can say it went all the way up to the pandemic. And something radically is changing. But that's for other people to talk about, or for me to talk about on the Anadromist, which I may do when I do my next How We Got Here series, which is coming. All right, so, Nahuamdis. Farewell. Take care. Toodles. Bye. I'm out of here. Just go, Burn.
When I go, I want you to give me 5 minutes. I told you boys I'm no escape artist. For the first time, I like the odds.
At the round earth's imagined corners, blow your trumpets, angels, and arise, arise from death, you numberless infinities of souls.